Montana Territory, 1887. The harsh September wind howled across the open plains, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Asher Wade pulled his worn leather coat tighter around his shoulders as he guided his horse along the lonely trail. At 26, he'd already seen enough of life's cruelties to last several lifetimes. "Come on, Thunder," he murmured to his dappled gray stallion, "just a few more miles to the cabin." The setting sun cast long shadows across the rugged landscape, painting the distant mountains with hues of gold and crimson. Beautiful, yes, but Asher had learned long ago that beauty could be deceiving. 3 years had passed since he'd buried his young wife and infant son, victims of a cholera outbreak that had swept through their small settlement. 3 years of solitude, working as a ranch hand and living alone in a small cabin on the edge of the Carlton property. Love was a luxury men like him couldn't afford out here. The frontier demanded everything: blood, sweat, tears, and gave precious little in return. Forming attachments only meant more pain when the inevitable happened. No, better to keep to himself, do his job, and survive. That was all a man could hope for in this unforgiving wilderness. As Asher crested a small hill, a flash of color in the distance caught his eye. He pulled Thunder to a halt, narrowing his gaze against the fading light. Someone was huddled beside the trail ahead, a splash of blue fabric against the brown earth. "Whoa, boy," he said, approaching cautiously. "Out here, even the most innocent-looking situation could be a trap." As he drew closer, he could make out the figure of a young woman slumped against the trunk of a lone cottonwood tree. Her blue traveling dress was torn and mudded, her honey-blonde hair falling loose from what had once been an elegant updo. Beside her lay a small leather valise and the broken remains of what appeared to be a parasol. Asher's first instinct was to ride on. Whatever trouble this woman was in, it wasn't his concern. The territory was filled with desperate people making desperate choices, but something, perhaps a flicker of movement, or simply the fact that night was falling fast, made him dismount instead. "Ma'am," he called, keeping a safe distance, "are you all right?" The woman stirred, lifting her head. Despite the dirt smudged across her face, Asher could see she was beautiful, young, perhaps 20 or 21, with delicate features and eyes the color of spring cornflowers. Those eyes widened with fear when she spotted him. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse but determined. She fumbled at her side and produced a small Derringer pistol, pointing it at him with trembling hands. Asher raised his palms. "Easy now, I'm not looking for trouble, just saw you sitting here and thought you might need help." "Are you with them?" she demanded, the pistol wavering slightly. "The men who took the stagecoach." "I don't know anything about any stagecoach," Asher replied calmly. "I'm just a ranch hand heading home after delivering cattle to Fort Benton. Name's Asher Wade." The woman studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against her fear. Finally, the pistol lowered slightly. "I'm Delilah Bellamy," she said, her refined accent marking her as Eastern-born. "The stagecoach was attacked 15 miles back. The driver was killed. I managed to escape in the confusion and have been walking ever since." Her voice cracked. "I thought I was going to die out here." Asher sighed inwardly. This was exactly the sort of complication he'd spent 3 years avoiding, but the temperature was dropping rapidly, and the young woman was clearly exhausted and unprepared for a night in the open. "Miss Bellamy, there's a storm coming, and these plains are no place for anyone after dark. My cabin's about 5 miles from here. I can take you there for the night, then to town tomorrow morning." Delilah hesitated, clutching her Derringer tighter. "How do I know I can trust you, Mr. Wade?" A bitter smile touched Asher's lips. "You don't. But your options are limited, and I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll come to no harm in my care." Another gust of wind swept across the plains, causing Delilah to shiver violently. With obvious reluctance, she tucked the Derringer into her pocket. "Very well, Mr. Wade, it seems I have little choice." Asher helped her to her feet, noting how she winced when she put weight on her right ankle. Without comment, he collected her valise and helped her mount Thunder before swinging up behind her. "Hold on," he instructed, wrapping one arm around her waist as he took the reins with his free hand. He tried to ignore the way she stiffened at his touch or the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair beneath the dust of the trail. Such observations were dangerous, reminders of things he'd locked away long ago. They rode in silence as the last light faded from the sky, thunder rumbling in the distance. Delilah Bellamy's arrival was an unwelcome disruption to Asher's carefully ordered existence. Come morning, he would take her to town and wash his hands of the whole affair. The frontier was no place for fine Eastern ladies, and he was no longer a man capable of escorting them through it. At least that's what he told himself as they rode through the gathering darkness, the warmth of her body pressed against his chest, a stark reminder of how long he'd been alone. Asher's cabin was small but sturdy, a simple one-room structure built of logs with a stone chimney at one end. As he lit the oil lamp, Delilah took in her surroundings. A narrow bed against one wall, a table and 2 chairs, a small cook stove and shelves holding books and supplies. Everything was neat and orderly if sparse. It's not much, Asher said, building a fire in the small hearth, but it'll keep the storm out. As if in response, rain began to patter against the roof, quickly increasing to a downpour. Delilah sank gratefully into one of the wooden chairs, extending her injured ankle. Thank you, Mr. Wade. I fear I would not have survived the night out there. Asher busied himself putting coffee on to boil, avoiding her gaze. Let me look at that ankle, he said, kneeling before her once the fire was crackling steadily. With gentle hands that belied his rough appearance, he removed her mud-caked boot and examined the swollen joint. Sprain not broken, he pronounced. You're lucky. Delilah gave a humorless laugh. Lucky is not how I would describe my circumstances, Mr. Wade. Asher raised his eyes to meet hers, struck again by their vivid blue. For an instant something passed between them, a shared understanding of life's cruelties before he looked away. I'll wrap it for you, he said, retrieving a clean cloth from a drawer, then you should eat something. You've had a hard day. As he worked, Delilah studied him more carefully. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26. Handsome too, with his tanned skin, light stubble, and eyes the color of weathered pine. His hands, though calloused from hard work, were surprisingly gentle as they bound her ankle. You've done this before, she observed. Spent 2 years as a cavalry scout before settling here, Asher replied without elaboration. Saw my share of injuries. Once her ankle was wrapped, he prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee. Delilah ate hungrily, realizing she hadn't had food since early morning. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows while thunder boomed overhead. You mentioned you were heading to town, Asher said, breaking the silence. What brings you to Montana territory? It's a long way from wherever you came from. Delilah hesitated, setting down her cup. Boston, she finally said. I came from Boston to teach at the new school in Silver Creek. Asher raised an eyebrow. Silver Creek's a rough mining town. Not many families there yet. That's precisely why they need a teacher, she replied with unexpected firmness. Children shouldn't grow up without education, no matter where they live. Her passion surprised him, as did her determination. Most Eastern women who came west did so as brides or to join family. Few ventured alone into the territories with nothing but a teaching position awaiting them. What about you, Mr. Wade? Delilah asked. You don't seem like a man born to ranch work. Asher's expression closed off. I do what needs doing, he said simply. You should get some rest, Miss Bellamy. You can take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire. Delilah recognized the dismissal but pressed on anyway. Those are books by Whitman and Thoreau on your shelf, not common reading for a ranch hand. For a moment, anger flashed in Asher's eyes, not at her observation, but at being seen beyond the facade he presented to the world. Then it was gone, replaced by careful neutrality. A man can enjoy poetry and still break horses, he said. The West doesn't care what you were before, only what you can do now. Before Delilah could respond, a particularly violent crack of thunder shook the cabin, causing her to start. Asher rose from his chair. The storm will pass by morning, he said. I have a spare shirt you can use for sleeping. It's clean, if not exactly fashionable. He retrieved a worn flannel shirt from a trunk and handed it to her, then turned to bank the fire for the night. I'll step outside while you change. Despite her protests about the rain, Asher insisted on giving her privacy. When he returned, damp but composed, Delilah was already in his bed, her traveling dress hung carefully over a chair to dry. His shirt engulfed her small frame, making her appear even younger and more vulnerable. Asher spread his bedroll on the floor before the hearth and extinguished the lamp. In the darkness, with only the glow of embers illuminating the cabin, an uncomfortable intimacy settled over them. "Mr. Wade," Delilah's voice was quiet but clear over the sound of rain. "Yes, Miss Bellamy." "Why did you stop today? You could have ridden past." Asher stared into the dying fire. "Get some sleep," he said after a long pause. "We leave for town at first light." But long after Delilah's breathing had evened into sleep, Asher remained awake, troubled by a question he couldn't answer. Why had he stopped? What had compelled him to break 3 years of careful isolation for a stranger on the road? Whatever the reason, he told himself, it changed nothing. By this time tomorrow, Delilah Bellamy would be in Silver Creek, and he would return to his solitary existence. It was better that way, safer. The last time he'd allowed himself to care, he'd lost everything. The frontier was no place for second chances. Morning arrived with clear skies and no sign of the previous night's storm except for puddles dotting the muddy yard. Asher had risen before dawn, tending to thunder and preparing a breakfast of coffee, bacon, and hardtack by the time Delilah awoke. "Good morning," she said, sitting up with a wince as her ankle protested the movement. Asher nodded in acknowledgement, keeping his eyes averted while she used the wash basin he'd set out for her. They ate in relative silence, the easy conversation of the previous evening replaced by an awareness that their brief association was drawing to a close. "How far is Silver Creek?" Delilah asked as she pinned her honey-blonde hair into a simple but neat arrangement. "About 15 miles, Asher replied, washing the breakfast dishes in a bucket of water. "We should reach it by early afternoon, assuming your ankle can handle the journey." "It feels much better today, thank you." She smoothed the wrinkles from her blue traveling dress, now mostly dry though still bearing the stains of her ordeal. Asher glanced at her for the first time that morning and found himself unable to look away. Even disheveled from her harrowing experience, Delilah Bellamy possessed a quiet dignity that commanded respect. Her cornflower blue eyes met his without flinching, and something stirred in his chest, an emotion he'd thought long dead. "We should go," he said abruptly, turning away to gather his saddlebags. Outside, the morning sun had begun to warm the damp earth, sending tendrils of mist rising from the plains. Asher helped Delilah onto Thunder's back, then mounted behind her, acutely aware of her slender form against his chest as they set off toward Silver Creek. The journey proved more challenging than anticipated. Recent rains had swollen Bitter Creek, forcing them to detour several miles to find a safe crossing. By midday, they had covered less than half the distance to town, and Delilah was clearly tiring, though she made no complaint. "There's a place up ahead where we can rest," Asher said, noting how she leaned increasingly against him. "Old Trapper's cabin, abandoned now, but the roof was sound last time I passed by." The cabin was little more than a shack, but it offered shelter and a place to rest. Asher helped Delilah dismount, supporting her weight as they made their way inside. She sank gratefully onto a rough-hewn bench while he gathered wood for a small fire. "I appreciate your patience, Mr. Wade," she said as he worked. "I know I'm delaying your return." Asher shrugged. "Ranch will still be there tomorrow." As flames began to lick at the kindling, he pulled bread and jerky from his saddlebags and offered them to her. They ate in companionable silence until Delilah spoke again. "You never answered my question last night," she said quietly. "Why did you stop to help me?" Asher stared into the fire, considering and discarding several responses before settling on the truth. "My wife would have been disappointed in me if I hadn't." Delilah's surprise was evident. "You're married." The word fell between them like a stone. "Elizabeth died 3 years ago, along with our son James. He was just 4 months old." "I'm so sorry," Delilah said, her voice soft with genuine compassion. "What happened?" "Cholera came through the settlement where we were living, took half the town before it was done." Asher's voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his hands together. "I was away delivering horses to Fort Kearny. By the time I got back, they were already in the ground." Delilah reached across the space between them, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "That's why you live alone in that cabin." It wasn't a question, but Asher nodded anyway. Elizabeth believed in helping those in need, said it was what separated men from animals. A bitter smile touched his lips, didn't save her, though. And you've been punishing yourself ever since, Delilah observed with unexpected insight. Living like a hermit, avoiding connections. Asher pulled away from her touch, uncomfortable with her perception. I'm not punishing myself, I'm being practical. The frontier doesn't reward softness. Those who survive are those who stay hard. Is that survival, Mr. Wade, or merely existence? The question hung in the air between them, unanswered as Asher rose to his feet. We should move on if we want to reach town before dark. But as he helped Delilah back onto Thunder, her words echoed in his mind. Was he surviving or merely existing, and what difference did it make either way? The trail to Silver Creek wound through rolling hills dotted with ponderosa pines. As they crested a particularly steep rise, the town came into view in the valley below, a collection of wooden buildings straddling a creek that glinted silver in the afternoon sun. There it is, Asher said, Silver Creek. Not much to look at, but it's growing. Delilah straightened in the saddle, her expression a mixture of apprehension and determination. It looks perfectly adequate for my purposes. They descended toward the town, the buildings growing larger as they approached. Silver Creek had expanded since Asher's last visit, with several new structures lining the main street. Mining operations in the surrounding hills had brought prosperity, evident in the fresh paint on the mercantile and the newly constructed church at the far end of town. As they rode down the main street, curious eyes followed their progress. A woman riding double with a cowboy was bound to attract attention in a place like Silver Creek. The school should be near the church, Delilah said, scanning the buildings. Asher nodded toward a small clapboard structure just visible beyond the church steeple. That must be it there. Before they could proceed further, a portly man in a black suit hurried from the mercantile, waving to catch their attention. His round face was flushed with excitement as he approached. Miss Bellamy, is that you? He called, squinting up at Delilah. Yes, I'm Delilah Bellamy, she confirmed, allowing Asher to help her down from the horse. Walter Simmons, ma'am. Mayor of Silver Creek. He pumped her hand enthusiastically before noticing her disheveled appearance. Good heavens, what happened to you? We expected you on yesterday's stage. Delilah glanced at Asher before responding. The stagecoach was attacked by bandits, Mr. Simmons. I was fortunate to escape, and even more fortunate that Mr. Wade found me. Simmons turned his attention to Asher, eyeing him with sudden suspicion. Wade, eh? Don't believe we've met. I work at the Carlton Ranch, Asher replied, tipping his hat slightly. Don't get to town much. The mayor's expression cleared somewhat. Carlton's a good man, supported the school from the start. He turned back to Delilah. Speaking of which, we've prepared accommodations for you, Miss Bellamy. Small room above the mercantile until proper teachers' quarters can be built. That sounds perfectly adequate, Mr. Simmons. Delilah smiled, though Asher noticed it didn't reach her eyes. However, I would appreciate a chance to freshen up before meeting anyone else. It's been a trying journey. Of course, Simmons gestured toward the mercantile. Mrs. Simmons will show you everything you need, and we can discuss the robbery later. Marshal Tanner will want details. As the mayor led Delilah toward the mercantile, she turned back to Asher. Mr. Wade, thank you for everything. I'm not sure how to repay your kindness. Asher remained mounted on Thunder, already feeling the familiar urge to leave town behind. No repayment necessary, Miss Bellamy, just doing what anyone would. Not anyone, she said quietly. Not out here. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, an unspoken connection that disturbed Asher more than he cared to admit. Good luck with your teaching, Miss Bellamy, he said finally, tipping his hat. Silver Creek could use some civilization. With that, he turned Thunder toward the general store to purchase supplies before heading back to the ranch. His duty was done. Delilah Bellamy was safe in Silver Creek, and he could return to his solitary existence with a clear conscience. Yet as he collected the items on Mr. Carlton's list, Asher found himself glancing repeatedly toward the mercantile where Delilah had disappeared. Her question from earlier continued to haunt him. Is that survival, Mr. Wade, or merely existence? For the first time in 3 years, the distinction suddenly seemed to matter. 2 weeks passed before Asher returned to Silver Creek. Mr. Carlton had sent him to arrange shipment for the fall cattle drive, a task that would normally have fallen to the foreman, except Tom Harker had broken his leg in a riding accident. Asher had accepted the assignment with reluctance, telling himself his discomfort had everything to do with the town and nothing to do with a certain schoolteacher with cornflower blue eyes. Silver Creek was bustling with activity when he arrived, miners and merchants going about their business in the crisp October air. Asher tied Thunder outside the freight office and completed his business as quickly as possible, hoping to be on the trail back to the ranch before noon. Fate, however, had other plans. As he emerged from the freight office, a commotion near the schoolhouse caught his attention. A crowd had gathered, voices raised in what appeared to be an argument. Against his better judgment, Asher found himself walking in that direction. The scene that greeted him made his blood boil. Delilah Bellamy stood on the schoolhouse steps, a protective arm around a young boy of perhaps 10 or 11. Facing her were 3 rough-looking men, miners by the look of their dirt-stained clothes. The largest of the 3 jabbed a finger toward the boy. "That half-breed has no place in a white school," he shouted, his face flushed with anger or whiskey, possibly both. "He belongs with his mother's people up on the reservation." Delilah drew herself up to her full height, which still left her nearly a foot shorter than her antagonist. "Thomas is a student at this school, Mr. Dawson, just like any other child in Silver Creek. His parentage is irrelevant to his education." "My boy ain't sitting next to no Indian," one of the other men spat. "It ain't natural." "Then your son will miss out on valuable learning opportunities," Delilah replied coolly, "because Thomas will remain my student for as long as he wishes to attend." The first man, Dawson, stepped closer, his posture menacing. "You're new here, miss, so maybe you don't understand how things work, but I'm telling you that boy goes or there'll be trouble." "Step back, Dawson." Asher's voice cut through the tension as he moved to stand beside Delilah on the steps. All eyes turned to him, including Delilah's, which widened in surprise. "Mr. Wade." Dawson sneered, "This ain't your business, cowboy." "I'm making it my business." Asher's hand rested casually near his holstered revolver. "Not a threat exactly, but a reminder. Miss Bellamy is right, the boy has as much right to learn as any other child." "Since when do ranch hands have opinions on education?" one of the other miners jeered. "Since ignorant men started threatening women and children," Asher replied evenly. "Now, you boys have made your feelings known. Time to move along before this gets unpleasant." For a tense moment, it seemed Dawson might escalate the confrontation. But Asher's steady gaze and the growing crowd of onlookers appeared to cool his temper. "This ain't over," he muttered, backing down the steps. "Come on, boys." As the miners stalked away, murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd before people began to disperse. Delilah turned to the young boy, whose dark eyes were wide with apprehension. "It's all right, Thomas," she assured him. "You go back inside with the others, we'll continue our lesson shortly." The boy nodded and disappeared into the schoolhouse. Only then did Delilah face Asher, relief and gratitude evident in her expression. "Thank you, Mr. Wade, that could have become very unpleasant." Asher shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with her attention. "Men like that only understand one language." "Nevertheless, your intervention was timely and appreciated." She studied him for a moment. "I didn't expect to see you in town again so soon." "Ranch business," he explained. "Shipping arrangements for the cattle drive." Delilah nodded, then glanced back at the schoolhouse door. "I should return to my students, but perhaps," she hesitated, "perhaps you would consider coming to supper this evening. As a proper thank you for today and for your help when we first met." Every instinct told Asher to decline. Getting involved in the school dispute in Delilah's life violated the careful boundaries he'd established after Elizabeth's death. And yet the words that came out of his mouth surprised even him. "What time?" A smile lit Delilah's face, transforming her from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. 6 o'clock, I'm boarding with Mrs. Simmons above the Mercantile." "I'll be there," Asher promised, tipping his hat before turning to leave. As he walked back toward Thunder, he questioned his own judgment. Supper with the schoolteacher was exactly the kind of entanglement he'd been avoiding for 3 years. But as he rode out of town to complete some errands before evening, Asher realized something unsettling. For the first time since burying his wife and child, he was looking forward to something, and that terrified him more than any confrontation with angry miners. Mrs. Simmons's cooking proved to be exceptional, the table laden with roast chicken, potatoes, fresh biscuits, and green beans from her garden. Asher, having bathed and changed into his cleanest shirt before returning to town, found himself seated across from Delilah in the Simmons's small dining room, uncomfortably aware of their host's curious glances. "So, Mr. Wade," Walter Simmons began as he carved the chicken, "Miss Bellamy tells us you rescued her after the stage robbery. Mighty fortunate you happened along when you did." "Just lucky timing," Asher replied, accepting a plate from Mrs. Simmons. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not necessarily," Delilah interjected. "Many would have ridden past rather than risk involvement." Mr. Wade showed true courage and compassion. Asher shifted in his seat, unaccustomed to praise. "How are you finding Silver Creek, Miss Bellamy? Is the school what you expected?" Her eyes lit up at the change of subject. "The children are wonderful, eager to learn and full of potential. We have 23 students now, ranging from 6 to 15 years of age. Including Thomas Blackfoot," Mrs. Simmons noted with a slight frown. "That caused quite a stir today from what I heard." "Thomas is an exceptionally bright boy," Delilah said firmly. "His father was a trapper who died last winter, and his mother wants him to have opportunities she never had. I see no reason to deny him an education." "Noble sentiments, Mr. Simmons said diplomatically, "but you must understand that relations with the Blackfoot have been tense in recent years. Some folks are still bitter about the conflicts." "Children shouldn't bear the burden of adult prejudices," Delilah replied. "And education is the surest path to understanding between cultures." Asher found himself studying her with growing admiration. The passion in her voice when she spoke about her students was captivating, as was her unwavering commitment to her principles. Few people in the territories maintained such idealism in the face of harsh realities. "What brought you to teaching, Miss Bellamy?" he asked, genuinely curious. A shadow passed over her face briefly before she composed herself. "My father was a professor at Harvard. He believed education was the key to progress, both personal and societal. When he passed away 2 years ago, I decided to honor his legacy by bringing that opportunity to those who might otherwise never receive it." "All the way from Boston to Montana Territory," Mrs. Simmons marveled. "That takes remarkable courage for a young woman alone." "Or remarkable foolishness," Delilah added with a self-deprecating smile. "My mother certainly thought so. She hasn't spoken to me since I accepted the position." "And yet here you are," Asher observed, "standing your ground against minors twice your size to protect a half-Blackfoot boy's right to learn." Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a mutual recognition of the other's strength in the face of loss and hardship. The remainder of the meal passed pleasantly, with conversation turning to town gossip and plans for the upcoming harvest festival. Throughout it all, Asher found himself drawn into the simple domesticity of the evening, a stark contrast to his solitary meals at the cabin. After supper, when Mrs. Simmons insisted on clearing the table herself, Delilah suggested a short walk to enjoy the evening air. Mr. Simmons gave his approval with a knowing smile that made Asher uncomfortably aware of the town's likely speculation about their relationship. Outside, the main street was quiet, most businesses closed for the day. A few miners still lingered at the saloon down the street, but otherwise, Silver Creek had settled into evening tranquility. They walked in comfortable silence until reaching the small church at the edge of town. "Thank you again for your intervention today," Delilah said as they paused in the shadow of the steeple. "I fear Thomas might have withdrawn from school if not for your support." "Those men were bullies," Asher replied. "I've never had patience for bullies." Delilah studied him in the fading light. "You're not what you pretend to be, Asher Wade." The use of his first name startled him. "What am I pretending to be?" "A simple ranch hand with no interest in the world beyond your cabin," she smiled softly, "but I've seen your books. I've heard how you speak, and I watched you face down 3 angry miners without flinching because it was the right thing to do." Asher looked away, uncomfortable with her perception. "Don't make me into something I'm not, Miss Bellamy. I'm just a man trying to get by, same as anyone." "Delilah," she corrected. "After all we've been through, I think you can call me Delilah." Her name felt intimate on his lips when he tested it. Delilah, then. A cool breeze stirred her honey-blonde hair, carrying with it the scent of pine and approaching winter. In that moment, with the last light of day painting the western sky in shades of amber and gold, Asher was struck by a longing he'd thought long buried, a desire for connection, for something beyond mere survival. "I should get you back," he said finally. "It's getting cold and I have a long ride ahead." Delilah nodded but made no move to leave. "Will you come to the Harvest Festival next week? The school children are performing, and there's to be dancing afterward." Every instinct warned Asher to refuse, to retreat to the safety of his isolation. Yet something stronger, something he couldn't name, compelled him forward. "I'll be there," he promised, offering his arm to escort her back to the mercantile. As they walked, a weight seemed to shift inside him, not lifting entirely but changing position, making room for something new. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, like standing at the edge of a cliff and contemplating the view rather than the fall. Later, riding back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, Asher realized he was smiling. The expression felt foreign on his face, like a language long forgotten but suddenly remembered. And for the first time in 3 years, the memory of Elizabeth brought not only pain but also a gentle whisper of permission. Perhaps it was time to start living again, instead of merely existing. The Carlton Ranch was abuzz with activity in preparation for the fall cattle drive. Cowboys mended tack, checked supplies, and prepared the herd for the long journey to the railhead at Fort Benton. Amid the chaos, Asher found himself distracted, his thoughts repeatedly drifting to Silver Creek and to Delilah. "Wade," Tom Harker's voice cut through his reverie. The foreman hobbled toward him on crutches, his broken leg still splinted. "You planning to stare at that saddle all day or actually fix it?" Asher blinked, realizing he'd been holding the same torn strap for several minutes without doing any work on it. "Sorry, Tom, got distracted." Harker lowered himself onto a hay bale with a grunt. "Been happening a lot lately, something on your mind?" "Just thinking about the drive," Asher lied, returning his attention to the saddle. Harker's tone made it clear he wasn't convinced. "Wouldn't have anything to do with you riding into town twice this week, would it? Or the fact you asked for Saturday off to attend that harvest festival?" Asher shot him a warning look. "Don't start, Tom." "Not starting anything," the foreman replied, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Just making an observation. Been a long time since you showed interest in anything beyond work and that cabin of yours." "I promised the schoolteacher I'd attend," Asher said, focusing intently on the leather in his hands. She stood up for a half-Blackfoot boy and some of the miners were giving her trouble, figured she could use the support. Harker's expression softened. "Good for her and good for you getting involved." He paused, then added more seriously, "Elizabeth would approve, you know." Asher's hands stilled. Few people on the ranch knew about his past. Harker was one of the exceptions, having worked alongside Asher since shortly after his arrival 3 years ago. "I know," Asher admitted quietly. "That's what makes it so damn complicated." Harker nodded understanding. "Moving forward doesn't dishonor what you had, Wade. Elizabeth wouldn't want you to spend your life alone." Before Asher could respond, a rider galloped into the ranch yard, pulling his horse to an abrupt halt before the bunkhouse. It was Billy Peterson, one of the younger hands who'd been sent to town for supplies. "Mr. Wade," he called, dismounting hastily. "You'd better come quick, there's trouble in town at the school." Asher was on his feet instantly. "What kind of trouble?" "That miner Dawson and some others," Billy explained breathlessly. "They're threatening to burn down the schoolhouse if the teacher doesn't send away the Indian boy. Marshall's out tracking horse thieves and Mayor Simmons can't control them." Without hesitation, Asher dropped the saddle and strode toward the corral where Thunder was grazing. "Tell Carlton where I've gone," he called to Harker as he saddled his horse with practiced speed. "You want company," the foreman offered, but Asher was already mounting up. No time, he replied, turning Thunder toward the trail. And you just slow me down with that leg. As he galloped toward Silver Creek, Asher's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Dawson had been drunk and belligerent during their last encounter, but threatening to burn down the school took matters to a dangerous new level. And knowing Delilah, she wouldn't back down, not even in the face of such intimidation. The 15 miles to town passed in a blur of dust and determination. When Silver Creek came into view, Asher could see a crowd gathered near the schoolhouse, the situation exactly as Billy had described. He urged Thunder faster, covering the last stretch at a breakneck pace. The scene that greeted him as he rode into town confirmed his worst fears. A group of miners, Dawson at their center, faced off against Delilah on the schoolhouse steps. Behind her, visible through the open door, were the huddled forms of children. Most disturbing was the torch in Dawson's hand, its flame dancing menacingly in the afternoon breeze. "Last chance, teacher lady," Dawson was saying as Asher dismounted. "Send the half-breed out, or we start with this fancy schoolhouse of yours." Delilah's voice carried clearly across the tense gathering. "I will not sacrifice one child to appease your hatred, Mr. Dawson. These students are under my protection, and I will not let you terrorize them." "Brave words," Dawson sneered, raising the torch higher, "but that wood's been drying all summer. It'll burn real pretty." "Put it down, Dawson," Asher pushed through the crowd, his hand resting on his revolver. "This has gone far enough." Dawson's eyes narrowed as he recognized Asher. "Look, boys, it's the schoolmarm's pet Cowboy. Come to save the day again." Several of the miners chuckled, but others shifted uncomfortably, seemingly less committed to Dawson's extreme measures. Asher took advantage of their hesitation, addressing the crowd rather than just Dawson. "You men need to think about what you're doing," he said clearly. "Threatening children, burning down a school, is that who you want to be? Is that the Silver Creek you want to live in?" "We just want the Indian gone," one of the miners muttered. "He don't belong here. Thomas Blackfoot's father fought alongside many of you during the last Blackfoot uprising," Asher countered, recalling information from his conversation with Delilah. "He died protecting settlers. Now his son wants an education so he can make something of himself. What kind of men deny a child that chance?" Uncertainty rippled through the crowd. Even some of Dawson's supporters looked troubled by this reminder. "Pretty words don't change facts," Dawson insisted, though with less conviction. "Mixing Indians and whites leads to trouble, always has." "The only trouble here is the kind you're making," Asher replied, taking another step forward. "Now put down that torch before someone gets hurt." Dawson's face contorted with anger. "Or what, Cowboy, you going to shoot me, in front of all these witnesses?" "If necessary," the cold certainty in Asher's voice made several onlookers step back. "But I'd rather not orphan your children over your poor judgment." This struck a nerve. Dawson glanced toward the schoolhouse where frightened faces peered from windows. Among them was a girl of perhaps 8 or 9 who shared his distinctive red hair and freckles. "Pa," her small voice carried across the suddenly quiet yard. "Pa, please don't burn our school." The torch wavered in Dawson's hand, his resolve visibly crumbling. Behind him, his companions began to disperse, no longer willing to be associated with threatening children. "This isn't over," Dawson muttered, but the fight had gone out of him. He tossed the torch into a water trough with a hiss of extinguished flame, then turned and stalked away. The tension broke like a fever. Parents rushed forward to collect their children while others dispersed, talking in hushed voices about what had almost happened. Asher made his way to Delilah, who stood trembling but unbowed on the schoolhouse steps. "Are you all right?" he asked, searching her face for signs of injury. She nodded, though her complexion was pale beneath her composure. "The children are safe," he assured her, gently taking her elbow to steady her. "You protected them, Delilah, you did good." "I did what any teacher would do," she replied, but leaned into his support as the adrenaline began to fade. "How did you know to come?" "Billy Peterson brought news to the ranch." Asher guided her to a bench beneath the schoolhouse window. "Rest here while I help get the children home." For the next hour, Asher assisted parents in collecting their children, reassuring those who'd been frightened, and ensuring everyone had safe escort home. Thomas Blackfoot's mother, a dignified woman with the same intelligent eyes as her son, thanked Asher with quiet sincerity before leading Thomas away. By the time the last child had departed, Mayor Simmons had arrived with several town council members, all expressing outrage at Dawson's actions and promising consequences. The marshal, they assured Delilah, would arrest Dawson upon his return for threatening to burn down the school. Throughout it all, Asher remained at Delilah's side, a steady presence as she dealt with concerned parents and town officials. Only when the schoolyard had finally emptied did he notice how exhausted she appeared. "Let me walk you home," he offered, collecting her shawl and books. The autumn sun was setting as they made their way to the mercantile in silence, each lost in thought about the day's events. When they reached the side entrance that led to her rooms, Delilah turned to face him. "You saved more than the school today," she said quietly. "You saved what it represents, the possibility of a different future for Silver Creek. One where children like Thomas have a chance." Asher shook his head. "You were the one standing your ground when I arrived, I just helped tip the balance." Why? The question was simple but loaded with meaning. Why did you ride 15 miles at a gallop for a school that isn't yours and children you don't know? The truth rose to Asher's lips before he could consider its implications. "Because you were there." The words hung in the space between them, more revealing than he'd intended. Delilah's eyes widened slightly, searching his face as if seeking confirmation of his meaning. "Asher." Whatever she might have said was interrupted by Mrs. Simmons opening the door, her face creased with worry. "Oh, Miss Bellamy, we've been so concerned. Walter told me everything, you poor dear, what a dreadful ordeal." As the older woman ushered Delilah inside, fussing over her with maternal concern, Asher stepped back. The intimacy of the moment had shattered, leaving him uncertain of what might have happened if they'd not been interrupted. "Thank you again, Mr. Wade," Delilah called over Mrs. Simmons's shoulder. "Will I still see you at the Harvest Festival?" Despite the day's chaos, Asher found himself smiling. "I'll be there," he promised. "Try to stay out of trouble until then." Her answering smile sent a warmth through his chest that lingered long after he'd ridden back to the ranch, a sensation both foreign and achingly familiar, the feeling of his heart gradually thawing after a long, cold winter. The Silver Creek Harvest Festival transformed the usually practical mining town into a scene of genuine celebration. Bunting and lanterns decorated the main street, while tables laden with food lined the area before the church. A makeshift stage had been erected for the children's performances, and a section of ground had been cleared for dancing. Asher arrived early, having taken particular care with his appearance. His best shirt, freshly pressed, complemented dark trousers and a vest he hadn't worn in years. His usual cowboy hat had been brushed clean, and his dark hair was still damp from washing. Several townspeople nodded greetings as he made his way toward the school area, many more welcoming than they might have been before the confrontation with Dawson. The miners' actions had backfired spectacularly. Instead of driving Thomas from the school, they had rallied much of the town around Delilah and her inclusive vision for education. The children were gathering near the stage, dressed in their finest clothes and visibly excited about their performance. Asher spotted Delilah among them, moving from group to group with last-minute instructions and encouragement. She wore a dress of deep blue that complemented her eyes, her honey blonde hair arranged in an elegant style adorned with small autumn flowers. She was, Asher realized with a jolt, the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. The thought should have triggered guilt or fear, but instead brought a sense of rightness that surprised him. Elizabeth would always hold a sacred place in his heart, but perhaps that heart was large enough to accommodate new feelings without diminishing the old. Delilah noticed him then, her face lighting with a smile that accelerated his pulse. She excused herself from the children and made her way to his side. "You came," she said, her pleasure evident. "I promised I would," Asher took in her appearance with undisguised appreciation. "You look beautiful, Delilah." A becoming blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you, the children are about to begin their recitations. I saved you a seat in the front row." The performance was charming in the way that only children's earnest efforts can be, slightly imperfect but full of genuine enthusiasm. They recited poetry, sang songs, and presented a short play about the first Thanksgiving. Thomas Blackfoot, Asher noted with satisfaction, had a prominent role and received warm applause from most of the audience. When the children took their final bows, Delilah joined them on stage to thank the community for supporting the school. Her natural grace and evident care for her students earned her admiring looks from many in the crowd, including, Asher noticed with a twinge of something like jealousy, several unmarried men. The festival transitioned to its more adult celebrations as darkness fell. Lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the gathering. Musicians set up near the dance area, tuning fiddles and guitars in preparation. Tables of food were unveiled, featuring everything from roasted meats to pies made with the last of summer's berries. Asher was filling a plate when Walter Simmons approached, his round face flushed with good cheer and perhaps a touch of the cider being served. "Wade, good to see you again," the mayor greeted him warmly. "Miss Bellamy was just telling me how instrumental you were in resolving that unfortunate business with Dawson." "She exaggerates my role," Asher replied modestly. "How is Dawson, by the way?" Simmons's expression sobered slightly, cooling his heels in the jail until his hearing next week. "Marshals charging him with threatening arson and public disturbance. He'll likely pay a fine and spend a few weeks behind bars." "And his children?" "His wife's caring for them," Simmons assured him. "Good woman, much better than he deserves." He glanced toward the dance area where the musicians had begun playing a lively reel. "You should ask our schoolteacher to dance, Wade. Several others have their eye on her, but I think she's waiting for you." Before Asher could respond, the mayor moved on to greet other townspeople, leaving him contemplating Simmons's observation. The thought of Delilah dancing with other men shouldn't bother him, and yet it did, more than he was comfortable admitting. He found her near the punch bowl, engaged in conversation with a woman he recognized as Thomas Blackfoot's mother. As he approached, both women turned to greet him. "Mr. Wade," Delilah smiled, "have you met Mrs. Blackfoot? She was just thanking us for supporting Thomas at the school." "We've met briefly," Asher nodded respectfully to the woman. "Your son performed well today." "Thanks to Miss Bellamy's teaching," Mrs. Blackfoot replied, "and thanks to you for standing up for him, Mr. Wade. Not many would do that for a half-Blackfoot child." "Any child deserves a chance at education," Asher said, echoing Delilah's sentiment from their earlier conversations. Mrs. Blackfoot studied him appraisingly before nodding, as if confirming something to herself. "I should find Thomas. He's probably with the other children by the cake table." She squeezed Delilah's hand. "Thank you again, both of you." As she departed, the musicians transitioned to a slower, more melodic tune. Couples began to move onto the dance floor, their figures casting long shadows in the lantern light. "Would you care to dance, Miss Bellamy?" Asher asked, surprising himself with his own boldness. Delilah's smile was answer enough, but she added, "I'd be delighted, Mr. Wade." He led her to the dance floor, suddenly aware that it had been years since he'd danced with anyone. But as he took her in his arms, one hand at her waist and the other clasping hers, the steps came back naturally. "You dance well," Delilah observed as they moved in time to the music. "Another hidden talent." "Elizabeth insisted I learn properly before our wedding," Asher admitted. "Said she wouldn't have her husband shuffling around the floor like a bear." Instead of dampening the mood, the mention of Elizabeth seemed natural, an acknowledgement of the past without being trapped by it. Delilah's expression remained warm, encouraging him to continue. "What else did Elizabeth insist on?" she asked gently. Asher found himself smiling at the memory, "That I learned to read poetry aloud without mumbling. That I never go to bed angry, that I remember birthdays and anniversaries without prompting." He guided her through a gentle turn. "She was much better at civilizing me than I deserved." "I think she'd be proud of the man you are now," Delilah said softly. "Standing up for children, facing down bullies, dancing at harvest festivals." Their eyes met and something shifted between them, a recognition of growing feelings neither had yet named. Asher pulled her slightly closer as they continued to dance, aware of curious glances from the townspeople but finding he didn't care. "What about you?" he asked. "You mentioned your father was a professor but not much else about your family." A shadow crossed Delilah's face. "There isn't much to tell. My mother comes from old Boston money, very concerned with social standing." She wanted me to marry well and maintain our family's position. When father died and I decided to come west to teach, she considered it a personal betrayal. She must be very proud beneath her disapproval, Asher suggested. Not many young women would have the courage to travel across the country alone to pursue their convictions. Perhaps, Delilah conceded, though she didn't sound convinced, but enough about the past, tonight is for celebrating. They danced through 3 more songs before taking a break to enjoy the festival food. As the evening progressed, Asher found himself relaxing into the community celebration in a way he hadn't experienced since before Elizabeth's death. He laughed at the children's antics, conversed with townspeople he'd previously avoided, and returned repeatedly to the dance floor with Delilah. It was well past midnight when the festival began to wind down. Families with young children had already departed, and even the most enthusiastic dancers were showing signs of fatigue. The musicians played a final, slow melody as Asher and Delilah swayed together beneath the starlit sky. "Walk me home," she asked when the music ended. The streets of Silver Creek were quiet as they made their way toward the mercantile, their path illuminated by moonlight and the occasional lamp in a window. They walked close together, their hands occasionally brushing in a way that sent currents of awareness through Asher's body. "When do you return to the ranch?" Delilah asked as they approached her lodgings. "Tomorrow morning," Asher replied. "The cattle drive leaves in 3 days, and there's still much to prepare." "How long will you be gone?" 2 weeks, maybe 3, depending on the weather." He studied her expression in the moonlight. "Will you be all right here?" "Dawson has friends who might still cause trouble." Delilah smiled at his concern. "I'll be fine. Marshal Tanner returns tomorrow and the town council has been surprisingly supportive since the incident. I think seeing Dawson threaten children shocked many into reconsidering their prejudices." They stopped before the side entrance to her rooms, neither quite ready for the evening to end. In the silver moonlight, with her face tilted up toward his, Delilah looked both vulnerable and strong, a combination Asher found irresistible. "I've enjoyed tonight," she said softly. "More than I expected to." "As have I," Asher admitted, taking a half-step closer. "It's been a long time since I allowed myself to enjoy anything." Delilah's gaze held his, unwavering. "And now?" The question hung between them, laden with possibility. Asher reached up to gently brush a strand of honey-blonde hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Now I find myself wanting things I thought I'd never want again," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Delilah leaned almost imperceptibly into his touch. "What things, Asher?" Instead of answering with words, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. But when Delilah's arms slid around his neck, the kiss deepened into something more profound, an answer to questions they'd both been asking since that first meeting on the trail. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Asher rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he murmured, though it was the last thing he wanted. "Yes, you should," Delilah agreed, making no move to release him. Another kiss, briefer but no less meaningful, and then Asher reluctantly stepped back. "I'll come see you before I leave for the cattle drive," he promised. "I'll hold you to that, Cowboy," she replied with a smile that stayed with him all the way back to his lodgings at the town's small hotel. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, Asher realized something that should have terrified him but instead brought a sense of peace. He was falling in love with Delilah Bellamy. And for the first time in 3 years, the future seemed like something to anticipate rather than endure. The morning of the cattle drive dawned clear and cold, the first frost of the season glittering on the grasslands surrounding the Carlton ranch. Cowboys bustled about, making final preparations for the long journey to Fort Benton. Asher, having returned from town the previous day, checked and rechecked Thunder's tack, ensuring everything was secure for the arduous trip ahead. "Wade," Tom Harker called from the ranch house porch, where he was overseeing preparations despite his broken leg. "Rider coming in fast from town." Asher looked up to see a horse and rider approaching at a gallop, sending clouds of dust rising in the morning light. As they drew closer, he recognized Billy Peterson again, and a sense of foreboding settled in his stomach. "Mr. Wade," Billy called as he reined his horse to a stop. "Telegram came for you. Marshal Tanner said to bring it right away." Telegrams were rare in Asher's experience and rarely brought good news. He took the folded paper from Billy's outstretched hand and opened it with apprehension. The message was brief but devastating. School burned, stop Miss Bellamy injured, stop come quickly, stop SIMMONS. Asher's blood turned to ice. When did this happen? Last night, Billy replied, his young face somber. They're saying someone said it deliberately. Miss Bellamy was inside working late. She got out, but she's hurt bad. Without hesitation, Asher turned to Harker. Tom, I have to go, the foreman interrupted, understanding immediately. We'll manage the drive, take whatever time you need. Asher was already moving, calling for fresh supplies as he led Thunder toward the ranch house. Within 15 minutes he had everything he needed for a hard ride to Silver Creek. How bad is she hurt? He asked Billy as he mounted. The young cowboy shook his head. Don't know for sure. Doc Jenkins is with her at the Simmons place. Marshall's looking for whoever did it. Nodding grimly, Asher wheeled Thunder around and set off at a gallop, pushing his horse harder than was wise but unable to temper his urgency. The 15 miles to Silver Creek had never seemed longer, each minute stretching endlessly as he imagined Delilah injured, perhaps dying, while he was too far away to help. By the time he reached town, Thunder was lathered with sweat, sides heaving from the punishing pace. Asher barely noticed, his focus entirely on reaching Delilah. The burned-out shell of the schoolhouse stood as stark evidence of the previous night's violence, its blackened timbers still smoking in places. He dismounted outside the mercantile, not bothering to tie Thunder as he raced up the steps to the Simmons' private quarters. Walter Simmons himself opened the door at Asher's knock, his usually jovial face grave. Wade, thank God you're here. She's been asking for you. How bad? Asher demanded, following the mayor inside. Burns on her hands and arms from breaking a window to escape, breathed in a lot of smoke too. Doc says the next day or so will tell. Simmons paused outside a closed door. She was working late, preparing lessons. Someone barred the front door from outside and set fire to the back. Dawson? Asher asked, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Still in jail, Simmons replied, but his brother arrived in town yesterday making threats. Marshall's looking for him now. Asher nodded, forcing himself to take a deep breath before Simmons opened the door to Delilah's sick room. The sight that greeted him nearly broke his composure. Delilah lay pale against white pillows, her breathing labored and her bandaged hands resting atop the quilt. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and a nasty cut marred her forehead where she must have struck something while escaping. Mrs. Simmons sat beside the bed, applying a cool cloth to Delilah's feverish face. At the sound of the door, Delilah's eyes fluttered open. When she recognized Asher, a weak smile touched her lips. "You're supposed to be on a cattle drive," she whispered, her voice raspy from smoke. Asher crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside her bed and carefully taking one bandaged hand in his. "As if I could leave when you're in trouble," he replied softly. "Can't let you have all the excitement without me." Mrs. Simmons tactfully excused herself, leaving them alone. Once the door closed, Asher allowed his stoic expression to crumble, revealing the fear that had driven him at breakneck speed to her side. "Delilah, when I got that telegram," he couldn't finish the sentence, the memory of those terrible moments still too raw. "I'm going to be all right," she assured him, though her labored breathing belied her words. "Dr. Jenkins says the burns will heal and my lungs will clear with time." "Who did this?" Asher asked, struggling to keep the rage from his voice. Delilah's expression darkened. "I didn't see clearly. Someone was watching the school when I was working late. I thought it was just a passerby, but then I smelled smoke. When I tried to leave, the door wouldn't open." "How did you get out?" "Broke a window with the globe from my desk," she explained, glancing down at her bandaged hands. "The glass cut me and the flames had reached the curtains. I don't remember much after that. Mrs. Blackfoot found me in the schoolyard, I think." Asher fought to control his anger, not wanting to upset her further. "The marshal will find whoever did this." "And my students?" Delilah asked, concern evident despite her weakened state. "The schoolhouse is gone. Where will they learn now?" Even injured and in pain, her first thoughts were for her students. Asher's heart swelled with admiration and something deeper, something he was finally ready to name. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "The town will rebuild, but right now you need to rest and heal." Delilah's eyes were already growing heavy, exhaustion claiming her despite her obvious desire to stay awake. "Will you stay?" she murmured, her fingers tightening slightly around his. "Wild horses couldn't drag me away," Asher assured her, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Sleep now, I'll be here when you wake." As Delilah drifted into slumber, Asher maintained his vigil, his mind working through what had happened and what needed to be done. Someone had deliberately tried to kill her, to silence her progressive ideas and inclusive teaching. The thought filled him with cold fury, but also with determination. Delilah had fought for her vision of what Silver Creek could be. Now he would fight for her. He was still at her bedside when Marshal Tanner arrived 3 hours later, his expression grim but satisfied. "Got him," the lawman announced quietly, mindful of Delilah's sleeping form. "Jade Dawson, brother of our friend in the jail, found him trying to flee town on the morning stage, still had burns on his coat sleeves from setting the fire." "He confessed?" Asher asked, careful not to disturb Delilah. "Didn't need to," Tanner replied. "3 witnesses saw him lurking near the school last night, and we found the bar he used to trap Miss Bellamy inside hidden in his room at the saloon. He'll hang for attempted murder." Asher nodded, a small measure of justice that did little to ease his concern for Delilah. "What about the school?" "Town council's meeting tomorrow to discuss rebuilding," the marshal said. "After this, even the holdouts are coming around to Miss Bellamy's way of thinking. Nothing unites folks like an attack on a young woman, especially a teacher." After Tanner departed, Asher continued his vigil through the afternoon and into evening. Mrs. Simmons brought food he barely touched and offered to relieve him, but he declined. His place was here, watching over Delilah as her breathing gradually eased and her fever slowly abated. It was well past midnight when she woke again, more lucid this time. Asher, who had been dozing in the chair, immediately leaned forward. "Water," he offered, helping her take small sips from a glass on the bedside table. "Thank you," Delilah murmured, settling back against the pillows. "You're still here." "I told you I would be," he reminded her, carefully adjusting her blankets. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," she admitted with a weak attempt at humor. "But better than before. Did they find who did it?" Asher nodded. "Dawson's brother. The marshal arrested him trying to leave town. He won't hurt anyone else." Relief softened her features. "Good." She studied his face in the lamplight. "You look terrible, Asher. Have you slept at all?" A smile tugged at his lips despite the circumstances. "Charming as ever, Miss Bellamy, and yes, I've dozed a bit." He sobered, taking her bandaged hand gently in his. "You scared years off my life, you know." "I didn't exactly plan to get trapped in a burning building," she pointed out, a hint of her usual spirit returning. "No, but you did choose to stand up for what's right, knowing there were those who opposed you," Asher replied. "That kind of courage is rare, Delilah, and precious." She looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's not courage when you don't feel you have a choice. Teaching all children, regardless of background, is simply the right thing to do." "And that conviction nearly cost you your life," Asher said softly. "When I got that telegram, when I thought I might lose you," he paused, gathering himself, "I realized something I've been avoiding for weeks now." Delilah's eyes returned to his face, a question in their cornflower blue depths. "What did you realize?" "That I love you," Asher said simply. "That despite all my efforts to remain isolated and uninvolved, you've worked your way into my heart. And the thought of a world without you in it is more than I can bear." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes, trailing silently down her pale cheeks. "Asher." "You don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I know it's sudden and you're in no condition to think about such things now. I just needed you to know." "No," she whispered, her bandaged hand turning to grasp his. "I mean, yes, it's sudden, but I think I've been falling in love with you since you found me on that trail. You, with your books of poetry and your gentle hands and your fierce protection of those who need it." Asher felt something inside him break open, not painfully, but like a seed splitting to allow new growth. He leaned forward, pressing his lips to her forehead in a gesture of tenderness he'd thought himself no longer capable of. "Then we'll face whatever comes next together," he promised. "Starting with getting you well again." Delilah's smile was tired but genuine. "And rebuilding the school, my students need me." They do, Asher agreed, and I need you too, Delilah Bellamy. More than I ever thought possible. As she drifted back to sleep, her hand still held in his, Asher allowed himself to envision a future he'd once believed forever lost to him. A home filled with love and purpose, children's laughter, a partner to share both joys and sorrows. It was a future worth fighting for, worth believing in. And for the first time since losing Elizabeth and their son, Asher Wade found himself looking forward to tomorrow. The rebuilding of the Silver Creek schoolhouse became a community project that united the town in ways few could have predicted. Men who had once muttered against Delilah's inclusive teaching policies now donated lumber and labor. Women organized fundraising suppers and quilting bees to replace lost books and supplies. Even the miners, many of whom had no children in the school, contributed their earnings to ensure the new building would be sturdier and safer than before. Through it all, Asher remained in Silver Creek, dividing his time between caring for Delilah and overseeing the construction. Mr. Carlton, upon hearing the full story, had granted him leave from ranch duties, understanding that some things transcended employment obligations. The foundations are set, Asher reported one crisp November afternoon as he sat with Delilah on a bench outside the mercantile. Her recovery had progressed steadily, allowing her short walks with his support. We should have walls up by the end of the week if the weather holds. Delilah's bandages had been reduced to small dressings on her more severely burned hands, and her breathing had improved significantly. Though still weak, she insisted on visiting the construction site daily, offering encouragement to the workers and suggestions for the layout. "Thomas brought me designs for new desks yesterday," she said, smiling at the memory. His mother is helping the children continue their studies at her home until the school is complete. "Mrs. Blackfoot is a remarkable woman," Asher observed. "The way she stepped forward has changed many minds in town." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching townsfolk go about their business in the afternoon sunshine. Much had changed in the weeks since the fire, not just the rebuilding efforts, but a subtle shift in the town's attitude toward both Delilah's teaching philosophy and their relationship. "Walter mentioned the town council is considering naming the new building Bellamy School," Asher said, taking her less-injured hand in his. "A fitting tribute to your courage." Delilah shook her head. "I didn't do anything special, Asher. I simply refused to compromise on something fundamental. Every child deserves an education." "And nearly died for that belief," he reminded her gently. "That kind of conviction inspires others. Look around you, this town is changing because of what you stood for." She couldn't deny the evidence before them. Silver Creek was evolving from a rough mining settlement into a more cohesive community, one that valued education alongside industry. Even Thomas Blackfoot and his mother now received respectful greetings from former critics. "What about you?" Delilah asked, changing the subject. "Mr. Carlton's letter arrived yesterday. He's offering you the foreman position now that Tom Harker has decided to retire." Asher nodded, having received his own letter from the rancher. "It's a good opportunity, better pay, more responsibility." "And 15 miles from Silver Creek," Delilah added quietly, the unspoken question hanging between them. They had not discussed the future beyond her recovery and the school rebuilding. Though their feelings for each other had been declared in that emotional night after the fire, practical considerations remained unaddressed. "Actually," Asher said, turning to face her fully, "I've been meaning to talk to you about that." Something in his tone made Delilah's heart quicken. "Oh. I've been thinking about what comes next for us." He took a deep breath. "The truth is, Delilah, I don't want to be 15 miles away from you. Not now, not ever again." Hope blossomed in her expression. "What are you saying, Asher?" Instead of answering immediately, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. When he opened his hand, a simple gold ring with a modest pearl setting lay in his palm. "I'm saying that I love you, Delilah Bellamy, that you've brought light and purpose back into my life when I thought both were lost forever. That I want to build a future with you, if you'll have me." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes as Asher continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his face. "I know it hasn't been long and we've faced more danger than courtship. I know I'm just a ranch hand with little to offer besides my heart and my hands, but if you do me the honor of becoming my wife, I promise to cherish and protect you for all the days of my life." For a moment, Delilah seemed unable to speak, overwhelmed by his proposal. Then, with tears streaming freely down her cheeks, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Asher Wade, I will marry you." Joy unlike anything he'd experienced in years surged through Asher as he carefully slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly large, he'd have to get it resized, but the sight of it on her hand made his chest tighten with emotion. "I have a confession," he said as he raised her hand to his lips. "I've already spoken with Mayor Simmons about property in town. There's land available near the new school. I thought perhaps we could build a home there." Delilah's eyes widened. "You'd leave the ranch. But you love that work." "I love you more," Asher replied simply. "Besides, Silver Creek needs a sheriff now that it's growing. Marshal Tanner suggested I consider the position. Said I have a knack for keeping the peace." "Sheriff Wade," Delilah tested the title, smiling through her tears. "It suits you. So that's a yes to the home in town as well." Instead of answering with words, Delilah leaned forward and kissed him, heedless of who might be watching on the public street. When they parted, both slightly breathless, her smile was radiant. "That's a very enthusiastic yes, Mr. Wade." News of their engagement spread through Silver Creek with the speed only possible in a small frontier town. By evening, well-wishers had visited the Simmons home to offer congratulations, bringing gifts and invitations to supper once Delilah was fully recovered. Even Mr. Carlton rode in from the ranch, ostensibly to discuss Asher's future employment but primarily to meet the woman who had captured his best hand's heart. The wedding was set for spring, after the new school was completed and Delilah had fully regained her strength. In the meantime, Asher divided his time between helping finish the school construction and preparing for his new role as town sheriff, a position that would allow him to continue protecting the community while remaining close to Delilah. Winter settled over Montana territory, blanketing Silver Creek in snow that glittered like diamonds in the sun. The schoolhouse rose steadily despite the cold, its sturdy walls and reinforced doors a testament to the town's commitment to education and to the teacher who had risked everything to defend it. On a bright December morning, with fresh snow crunching beneath their boots, Asher escorted Delilah to the nearly completed building for her first inspection of the interior. The structure was twice the size of the original, with large windows that would flood the space with natural light. "What do you think?" he asked as she moved slowly through the main classroom, her fingers trailing over the newly installed blackboard. "It's perfect," Delilah breathed, her eyes shining with emotion. "Better than I ever imagined." Asher watched her explore the space, her excitement evident in every movement. The burns on her hands had healed enough for her to resume most normal activities, though she still tired easily, a reminder of how close he had come to losing her before their life together had even begun. "There's one more thing to show you," he said, taking her hand and leading her to a door at the back of the classroom. Beyond it lay a smaller room with bookshelves lining one wall and a large desk positioned near the window. A comfortable chair and reading lamp completed the simple but inviting space. "Your office," Asher explained. "Every proper teacher should have one." Delilah turned to him in surprise. This wasn't in the original plans. "I took the liberty of adding it," he admitted. "A place for you to work in peace, to prepare lessons or grade papers without interruption." Tears filled her eyes as she took in the thoughtful addition. "You did this for me." "I did," Asher confirmed, drawing her into his arms, "and I have one more surprise." He guided her to the window, which offered a clear view of an empty lot directly across from the school. Snow covered the ground, but wooden stakes marked out the foundation of what would clearly be a substantial home. "Our house," he explained, his arms encircling her from behind as they gazed out at the site. "Close enough that you can walk to school each day, even in winter." Delilah leaned back against his chest, her hands covering his where they rested at her waist. "It's going to be wonderful, Asher." "All of it." "Yes, it is," he agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "though not half as wonderful as the woman I'm building it with." They stood together in the peaceful quiet of the new schoolroom, the future stretching before them like the pristine snow outside, clean and full of possibility. For Asher Wade, who had once believed his capacity for love died with Elizabeth, the miracle of second chances had never felt more real or precious. The frontier had taken much from him, a wife, a child, years of happiness. But in its harsh beauty, it had also given him an unexpected gift, the courage to open his heart again when a lost traveler needed his help on a lonely road, and for that he would be forever grateful. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and greening hills, transforming the Montana landscape from winter's monochrome to a vibrant palette of new life. The Silver Creek schoolhouse was completed just as the first wildflowers appeared along the creek banks, its fresh paint gleaming in the April sunshine. Inside, Delilah arranged books on shelves and placed fresh-cut flowers on her desk in preparation for the grand reopening ceremony scheduled for the following day. Her recovery was complete, though she still carried small scars on her hands as reminders of that terrible night, badges of courage, Asher called them. "Everything looks perfect," he said from the doorway, taking in the orderly rows of desks and the colorful maps adorning the walls. As promised, the town council had officially named it Bellamy School, with a hand-carved wooden sign above the entrance. Delilah smiled, adjusting a crooked picture. "I think the children will be pleased. It's been a long winter of makeshift lessons in the church basement." "They're excited to have their teacher back in a proper classroom," Asher agreed, crossing to help her with a particularly heavy geography book. "Though I suspect Thomas may miss having lessons in Mrs. Blackfoot's home." "He's coming to the celebration tomorrow with his mother," Delilah said, "along with all the other students and their families." The mention of tomorrow's ceremony brought a nervous flutter to her stomach, though not because of the school reopening. Tomorrow held an even more significant event, their wedding, scheduled to take place immediately following the school dedication. It had been Delilah's idea to combine the two celebrations. "Both represent new beginnings," she had explained when suggesting it, "and both are about building community." Asher, who would have married her in a blizzard if necessary, had readily agreed. Now, with less than 24 hours remaining before they exchanged vows, an unfamiliar nervousness had settled over him. "Second thoughts?" Delilah asked perceptively, noting his distant expression. "Never," he assured her quickly. He hesitated, trying to articulate feelings he'd never expected to experience again. "When Elizabeth died, I thought that part of my life was over forever. I never imagined I could feel this way again, hopeful, excited about the future." Delilah crossed to stand before him, taking his hands in hers. "Is that what's troubling you, the comparison?" Asher shook his head, not troubled exactly. "Just grateful and a little overwhelmed that life has given me a second chance at happiness." "Elizabeth will always be part of you," Delilah said gently, "as she should be. I would never ask you to forget her or your son." "I know," Asher raised a hand to cup her cheek. "That's part of why I love you so much. Your heart is big enough to understand that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, it only grows." Their kiss was tender, a promise of the future they would build together. When they parted, Delilah's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Now, Sheriff Wade, I believe you have duties to attend to before our wedding, and I have final preparations for tomorrow's ceremony." Asher reluctantly released her, glancing at the tin star pinned to his vest, a symbol of his new role in Silver Creek. The town had changed dramatically in the months since the fire, growing in both size and civility. New businesses had opened, including a proper restaurant and a millinery shop. Families had moved in, drawn by reports of the excellent school and increasing economic opportunities. "I'll see you at supper with the Simmons tonight," he said, stepping toward the door. "Try not to get into any trouble before then." Delilah's laughter followed him out into the spring sunshine. "I make no promises, Sheriff." The wedding day dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the dual celebration. By mid-morning, nearly every resident of Silver Creek had gathered at the new schoolhouse, dressed in their Sunday best and bearing gifts for both occasions. Children ran excitedly around the schoolyard, their energy infectious as adults chatted and arranged food on tables set up beneath newly leafed trees. Asher, standing near the front steps with Mayor Simmons and several town council members, felt a curious blend of nervousness and absolute certainty. His new suit, ordered specially from Helena, fit well but felt slightly foreign after years of ranch wear. Only the familiar weight of his revolver at his hip provided a sense of continuity with his past life. "Nervous, Wade?" Simmons asked with a knowing smile. "Not about marrying Delilah," Asher replied honestly. "Just about doing it in front of the entire town." The mayor chuckled. "Getting hitched is public business out here, binds you not just to each other but to the community." He surveyed the growing crowd with satisfaction. "And this community owes you both a great deal." Before Asher could respond, a hush fell over the gathering as Delilah appeared at the far end of the schoolyard. She wore a gown of pale blue silk that complemented her eyes, her honey blonde hair arranged in an elegant style adorned with small white flowers. Mrs. Simmons walked beside her in place of the father she'd lost, while several of her female students preceded them, scattering flower petals along the path. The sight of her stole Asher's breath. In that moment, surrounded by the community they'd helped build, with spring blossoms scenting the air and promise stretching before them, he knew with absolute certainty that he'd found his true home. The school dedication came first, with Mayor Simmons delivering a speech about the importance of education and the courage of those who championed it. Delilah cut the ribbon across the new doorway to enthusiastic applause, especially from her students, who would begin classes in the new building the following Monday. Then, with the school officially opened, attention turned to the wedding. The pastor from the town's small church stepped forward as Asher and Delilah took their places before him. Their vows were traditional but spoken with deep personal meaning, each word a covenant neither entered lightly. "I, Asher Wade, take you, Delilah Bellamy, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Asher pronounced clearly, his eyes never leaving hers. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Delilah's voice was equally steady as she repeated the vows, her hands warm and sure in his grasp. When the time came to exchange rings, Thomas Blackfoot stepped forward proudly as ring-bearer, his solemn expression belying his youth as he offered the small cushion bearing their wedding bands. "By the power vested in me," the pastor concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Cheers erupted as Asher drew Delilah into his arms, their kiss sealing both their vows and the journey that had brought them to this moment. When they turned to face the assembled townspeople, hands clasped tightly together, the celebration began in earnest. Music from a hastily assembled band filled the schoolyard as tables laden with food were unveiled. Children played games organized by older students, while adults offered congratulations to the newlyweds between dancing and feasting. Even Mrs. Blackfoot danced, partnered respectfully by one of the minors who had once opposed her son's presence in the school. As evening approached, Asher found a moment of relative quiet with his new wife beneath one of the schoolyard trees. "Happy, Mrs. Wade?" he asked, still marveling at the reality of their marriage. "Completely," Delilah assured him, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the continuing festivities. "Though I'm looking forward to our own home soon." Their house across from the school was nearly complete, lacking only finishing touches before they could move in. For now, they would spend their wedding night at the town's small hotel before returning to rooms at the Simmonses' home for the final weeks of waiting. 2 weeks at most, Asher promised, his arm tightening around her waist. "I've hired extra men to speed the work." As the celebration continued around them, Asher found himself reflecting on the remarkable chain of events that had led to this day. A chance encounter on a lonely trail, a young woman with the courage to stand for her convictions, a school fire that could have ended in tragedy but instead united a town, all pieces of a story neither could have predicted but both now treasured. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Delilah asked, noting his contemplative expression. Asher smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About how the worst day of my life led, eventually, to the best. About how loss and love are sometimes so tightly woven together that you can't have one without risking the other." "And was it worth the risk?" she asked softly, though her eyes suggested she already knew his answer. "Beyond measure," Asher replied without hesitation. "You helped me understand that closing yourself off from pain means closing yourself off from joy as well, that survival without connection isn't really living at all." Delilah's smile was radiant as she leaned up to kiss him, heedless of the knowing looks and good-natured teasing their display of affection provoked from the wedding guests. "I love you, Sheriff Wade," she whispered against his lips. "And I love you, Mrs. Wade," he returned, his heart fuller than he'd ever thought possible, now and always. As twilight settled over Silver Creek, casting long shadows across the schoolyard and turning the western sky to gold, Asher Wade held his bride close and gave thanks for second chances. The frontier that had once seemed so empty and unforgiving now offered boundless possibility, a future filled with purpose, community, and above all, love. The cowboy who had once vowed never to let himself care again had learned, through one remarkable woman's courage and compassion, that the heart's capacity for healing matched its capacity for pain. And in that knowledge he had found not just survival, but true and lasting joy.